And so, in the continuing series of the lessons from the initial fall of man, and we are going to read in Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, starting now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the trees which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, yet lest ye die. Now I want to go real quick to Genesis 2nd chapter, verse number 16. And this is saying exactly what God commanded to Adam and Eve. It says, and the Lord God commanded, the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. In that day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And so that is all that God said to man at that time. Didn't give the exact location of the tree, didn't say the tree was in the midst of the garden, but we find out through Eve in Genesis chapter 3, verse 2, that she knows where that tree is. And she's describing the tree. She certainly knows enough to where she could have been victorious in this conversation and situation with the serpent. But the approach of the serpent, which we know was Satan itself, was to not come in with an overwhelming lie, not come in with an engulfing kind of presence, but he simply placed a question. And it's a knowing question, it's a loaded question. Yea, hath God said, Of every tree of the garden you should not eat of it. And like I said before, sometimes we are embarrassed when we get in certain venues and we get in certain places. It might be a party, it might full of upper crust rich folk, or people that we feel that we have to impress, and they'll look at you. One of them will look at you in a knowing manner and will ask you a question. And I'm not saying this so you can get the feeling of how you can be embarrassed by some of these questions that go to the inner parts of yourself. And so, hath God said, is what the serpent asked of Eve, that you will die? Has God said that of every tree of the garden you should not eat? And we talked about earlier how a loaded question is a question you already know the answer to. And so Eve had an answer, though. And she told the serpent, of every tree we should freely eat. And like I said before, the question has come to question whether God has been fair to you. The question has come to question whether you are being restricted beyond measure. And so the first thing that we notice even out of Eve's answer is that of every tree that was good to eat, God, he foreknew and forelooked at the needs of man, including his psyche, including his need for variety. And so, yes, God had provided, and that's confirmed in chapter 2 and 16, where God says, of every tree, you are free to eat, every tree in the garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Remember also, the tree of life was there too, and man did not choose that either. And so Eve confirms it, even as the adversary, the serpent, the enemy is talking to her, and she confirms it and says that we are free to eat of this, the trees of the garden. Close it.